Muskan was a young 16-year-old girl. One day she turned around to me and said, "Sir, my story was written even before I was born. Naseeb mein likha hai," she said. She wasn't angry, she wasn't dramatic. She said it as a statement of fact. That someone might say, "This is my surname," or "This is my height." Trafficked at the age of 12, her childhood ended even before it began. Over the next few years, she was repeatedly abused, controlled, dehumanized, denied safety. She was denied choice and denied even the most basic dignity. She lived in isolation, often without light, care, and any control over her own body. They had gang raped her, impregnated her, and aborted her by kicking against her stomach until the baby was bleeding out. She was then sold multiple times across three cities of Mumbai and then Delhi and finally at Bareilly, UP. By the time she was 16, she had learned something far more dangerous than fear. She had learned resignation. She no longer cried. She no longer resisted. She no longer imagined a different future. She left everything to fate. That moment stayed with me because I realized how dangerous hopelessness is. Not when people cry, but when they stop imagining. Most of us over here, our futures are open until, of course, our Wi Fi stops working. But for her, there was no temporary disruption. There was no signal of possibility at all. Her mother had been trafficked. She believed because of that her destiny was already sealed. Several years later, after she was rescued, I met her again, not in the same place, not with the same fear, but this time she was running a small tailoring unit, and she was a mother by now, and she was mentoring other women who had believed that their futures are fixed. And that moment changed me. It made me realize how deeply important that no story is truly finished. Even when the first draft is written in the face of injustice, it can be rewritten with courage, compassion, and opportunity. But before a story can be rewritten, the author must be free to hold the pen. And for millions of people, that basic right is stolen. That's why this theme, imagining tomorrow together, matters. Because imagination is not a luxury, it is a starting point of every future we will ever build. Now, human trafficking isn't just about people moving from across borders, it is about people being moved out of their own stories. Now, trafficking rarely begins in brothels, it begins with a lie. It begins with the promise of work, safety, love, or a better life. That slowly becomes a trap. Human trafficking is often imagined as something dark and hidden, but in reality, it is rarely that. Rarely begins that way. It often starts in the daylight with smiles, promises, and paperwork. That's why good people don't recognize it. Evil rarely introduces itself honestly. The future of millions go unwritten when poverty, gender inequality, lack of opportunity, and broken systems when they intersect. Long before exploitation becomes visible, closing doors for people before they are allowed to dream. Now, human trafficking is moving people from one place to another. This is known as the AMP model, where we have action, means, and purpose, where the action is moving a person from one place to the other using force, coercion, or fraud, etc., and with the purpose of exploitation. This is modern day slavery. Let me give you one number, just one, not to shock you, but to ground us. The 2023 Global Slavery Index estimates that on any given day in 2021, 11 million people were living in modern slavery. Their lives dictated by someone else's greed rather than their own choice. Now, this means that the prevalence rate is for every 1,000 Indians, there are 8 people who are being trafficked. In the Asia and the Pacific, out of 27 countries, we rank 6th. And among the countries of the world, of 160 countries, we rank 34th. Now, this is not just a statistical problem, it's an imagination problem. Because when systems fail repeatedly, people stop believing that tomorrow can be look different from today. Now, in my field of work, we challenge deeply entrenched paradigms of exploitation and apathy. And intentionally, we build new frameworks where safety, dignity, and opportunity are not exceptions but norms. Now, it means recognizing that this change follows an order, like I mentioned. First comes safety, because no one can imagine a future while surviving a threat. Then stability, because legal identity, health, and a sense of belonging are so important. And then, of course, comes skills, livelihoods, and real choices become possible for them. Now, when this order is reversed, people fall back into vulnerability. When it is respected, futures begin to open. Now, this work didn't begin for me as a career choice. It began for me as a personal rewriting. Like many people, had a predictable path, one that offered comfort, stability, and expectations that made perfect sense on paper. I grew up in a well-off family. My parents were willing to send me to the United States to study medicine, and I was already beginning the process. On paper, my future was really approved. It was the kind of life where relatives would stop worrying about you and start talking about among themselves about how you're going to be very successful. But here's the part that didn't show up on paper. Even with the security around me, my life was quietly falling apart. I was drinking heavily, running with a gang of friends, carrying knives, getting into fights over petty things, sometimes over girls, always over wounded pride. From the outside, I looked set. From the inside, I was restless, angry, and drifting. Privilege doesn't protect you from losing your way. Sometimes it hides it better. Now, and then came a moment, not dramatic, not loud, but deeply unsettling. An encounter that forced me to confront who I was really becoming and who I was not. And it was the first time I realized that a good future can still be the wrong one. That experience began to reorder something inside me. It didn't instantly fix me, it just gave me clarity. But that clarity taught me how to say no. Now, no to certain careers, no to comfort, no to opportunities that people around me would have thought are obvious and even irresponsible to refuse. Not because these opportunities were bad, but because they weren't mine. At some point, a question confronted me that I no longer could ignore. Am I successful or am I useful? Success looks great on LinkedIn, but usefulness is rarely glamorous. Success asks, how far have I come? Usefulness asks, who came with me? And that led me to witness the most powerful second drafts imaginable, written not by me, but by survivors themselves. This work is very meaningful, but it's also very slow, exhausting, and often deeply frustrating. Rescues fail. Systems resist change. This work doesn't end with rescue. We walk alongside people for 5 to 7 years through their emotional swings, withdrawals, resistance, and repeated setbacks. There are moments when trust breaks down, progress stalls, and hope feels fragile. Sometimes people return to the very situations we helped them escape, and that is devastating, heartbreaking. These are the realities of change that are rarely talked about. And yet, some moments remind you why imagining tomorrow together is worth the cost. One woman rescued from exploitation now runs her own business. The first time she handled her own money, she told me her hands were shaking. And not because of fear, but because of the fact that the first time that money was hers. She tells the other women around her, don't let anyone else write your ending. Now, but it took tons of patience and follow up with her to keep her on track, to find healing, and after she was rescued. Another teenage girl, moments away from being trafficked from a village, was intercepted in time. It began with a worried phone call, a missing bus, a promised job that didn't exist, and a very narrow window of time. Intervention, while often dramatic, is also involving a lot of coordination, paperwork, waiting, and risk. And then comes safety. But rescue was the beginning. Rewriting her future took years. Today she is in school. She is dreaming of becoming a doctor, not because that is impressive, but because she wants to heal what once she survived. These aren't happy endings. For me, they are honest beginnings. They remind us that the second draft doesn't ease the past, it redirects the future. A second draft is not a second life, it is a courage to shape the one we already have. In one red light area, what began as a small daycare center has grown into a community hub, a place of learning and livelihoods and hope. Now, these stories are not miracles. For me, they are blueprints of possibility. A miracle is something you admire from a distance, but a blueprint is something you can replicate. Again and again, we see the same pattern work in our lives. Safety first, dignity next, opportunity after. When people are given the right conditions, they reclaim authorship of their lives. Now, the future is not something that happens to us, it is something we choose to co author. Authorship is a responsibility. You can't blame the book if you're holding a pen. And that's the uncomfortable part, because it means that you're not just victims of systems, but participants in them. When we empower people to rewrite their stories, we don't just fight trafficking, we rewrite what progress looks like. Now, every person here, whether you're a student, you're a professional, or a leader, you hold the same power. What stops us is that often not circumstances, but imagination. Now, compassion, courage, and creativity together can help rewrite destinies, not someday in the future, but starting now. Now, which is why this conversation matters far beyond this field of work that I'm talking about. In your classroom, it might be a rule that silences certain voices. In your future workplace, it might be a industry norm that exploits interns and maybe workers, contract workers. In your family, it might be a tradition that limits choices based on gender or circumstance. Not every tradition is wrong, but every tradition deserves questioning. Imagining tomorrow together means recognizing that no future is worth building which is built alone. Now, first, as I come to an end and close, and I want to wrap this up, first, let me say that let's start questioning fixed narratives, especially the ones that sound practical. History's biggest injustices survived because they sounded normal. Whenever you hear this is how it's always been, ask who does this serve? Now, secondly, ask yourself how you start using your influence intentionally. Your skills, your education, your networks can either maintain broken systems or redesign them. Thirdly, every time you choose empathy in action, where every time you choose justice over convenience or courage over silence, you pick up the pen. Now, imagining tomorrow together is not just a theme, it is a responsibility, it is our responsibility. The question is not who will write the future, but what kind of future will we write together? Because hope is not a story we tell, it's a story we write, one act of courage at a time. The page is open, the pen is in your hand. The question is not, is this my problem or your problem? It is our problem. We often wait until something happens to us in our own homes, our own family, where our daughters or our sisters go missing or get trafficked, and then we wake up. But this is a real reality that is happening today in the world, and we need to stand up and start writing, taking the pen and helping others rewrite their stories. Thank you.